Okay. We're live. Okay. You're muted.
Okay, cool. Where are we supposed to be? Do you know?
Yeah, you think you had it.
Was it structure of the earth?
Yeah, we might have been a little further along. I think we might want to revisit this and then skip most of the Zuzats because that's where we got stuck. Because a lot of I mean, I think, let me see here, who was it? In the second anthology an anthological commentary on this.
Yeah.
Let's see here.
Oh, you know what? Here's
Let's
here's
see.
the
Yeah.
life of the earth.
I don't think we went that far yet.
Maybe not.
Let me see here. Because I did like what Lissy in here said about past without history and conditions of life, Hegel on the terrestrial organism. He did summarize most of the structure of the Earth, like in the Zuzats, especially what he was
Yeah.
getting at.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to see if I can find it again. 'Cause I don't think I highlighted it. It's like I meant to.
Yeah.
But it was,
Hey,
I think, she was showing the transitional states. Now it all kind of showed a direction rather than just the stratified. It's like the just a projection of distance or like the kind of difference down the rock is equals the time, and it's more about they were thinking about just the time too harshly, and not that it's a movement or kind of a showing of a transition.
yeah.
Although at the time they still didn't have an idea of what the whether the fossils they're finding of like clams and stuff were actual fossils or if they were just happened to form in that shape.
Hmm.
Which we know now what that they were really fossils, but
Yeah.
so he held the proper we don't know yet idea.
Yeah. And
Where is
it's
it?
one of the things I really appreciate about his approach is that if the science is not 100% on it yet, he always leaves that opening like here's the current theory, which tells me that, even for I
What is
hate
this?
using this word, even for a bourgeois thinker, which I mean, you know, he was doing science the way science was at least supposed to be done. Like, if you were going to be taken seriously, you know,
Mm-hmm.
which I appreciate. I really do.
I think I found it, by the way. And I just what is so geological taxonomy is sublated in abstract conceptual relations, and the empirical importance of geology is reduced to a trivial fact that P is a part of Earth's composition. That's his complaint about, and that's sorry, I got it's kind of in the middle. It's his complaint about geology at the time being granite, slate, peat, quartz, etc. are philosophically interesting only that they are relevant to the emergence of the universal spatial formations such as pebbles, rocks, mountains, and tunnels, as well to the respective mechanical chemical processes that facilitate the emergence of these forms. They are nothing but determinations of a holistic process of physical organization. And to go for the full thing, it says right here is that the following I developed this Hegelian model further. I take Hegel's philosophy of nature to determine how particularly fills out space and by implication time. And so just sort of making the connection that the, movements like and all the things in like the evolution of the earth kind of left this sort of structure that itself fills out through space because of how it was formed and such, which then itself is done in time. So it's not a flat representation of time that geologists' time used to implicate. It's a seeing in time because it's implication of processes of tertiary, and that is the part that is philosophically interesting.
No,
Which,
say it three times fast.
yeah, sorry, were they going too fast? Because I tend to talk fast.
No, no, I'm
I've been told that before.
no, I'm joking. Trust me, the fastest I've ever heard a person talk through their points was Doug. and it still is Doug. Every time he gives, I'm not complaining, and I love Doug to death. He's a brother to me, but every time he gets up on the podium, it's like he's on a stopwatch almost, and I'm like, slow down, brother, slow down. It's gonna be okay. Um, no, I mean, we've been in groups together,
Yeah.
all of us with him. When he's talking normal, he talks normal, just like in the group. But when he gets up on a podium or in front of the Zoom audience, he speeds up, and you're like, can you reel it back a little bit so I can rehear what you were trying to say? Um, he has the opposite problem I have. I tend to go haltingly slow whenever I get in front of an audience. He, on the other hand, speeds up. So, all right, so let's start for the audience and read through Structure of the Earth. Hopefully, I'm not
Yep.
hopefully this isn't a repeat, but maybe if we just stick to the main and the remark and then move on to
Yeah.
the next, we'll do ourselves a favor. So this is Structure of the Earth, subsection 340. The physical organization of the Earth as immediate does not begin with the simple, enveloped form of the germ, but with the beginning, which has fallen apart into a duality, into the concrete granitic principle and the cal uh, calcareous principle. The former is the core of mountains, in which the triad of moments is displayed in an already developed state, while the latter is the difference which has been reduced to neutrality. So when he's talking about this, before I go on, people watching are going to be like, okay, what the hell does that mean? So on the one hand, you see what the landscape looks like on the one hand, and on the other, you have the fact that it got there through a long, long period of change, which you can't see because you're living in the immediate moment. You're not living in every moment like a wormhole prophet from Deep Space Nine, right? You can't see the whole timeline. When he talks about the Calcareous principle and how he describes it here, what I'm taking from that is, you know, those are the two states. Change has created the concrete, right? Uh, and they work dialectically. I think the development of the moments, going back to the text, the development of the moments of the first principle into specific formations goes through a series of stages in which the further forms are partly transitional. The granitic principle remaining the basis, only more unlike and unformed within itself, partly a development of its moments into a more determinate difference and into more abstract mineral forms such as metals and fossil objects generally, until the development loses itself in mechanical stratifications and alluvial terrains, lacking in any imminent formative process. Side by side with this proceeds the development of the other, the neutral principle, partly into weaker transformations and partly in combination with the granitic principle into formations ranging from concrescent forms down to merely external mixture. He's losing me on how this works. So maybe the first paragraph of the Zusatz will help a little bit here. So Werner's mineralogy distinguishes between rock species and loads of veins geology of the former and whatever the hell that is of the latter. These names are no longer used in textbooks of mineralogy. It is only miners who retain the distinction. The rocks comprise the concrete mass in geology studies. The more abstract side, the veins which too form themselves into mountains so that generally the two sides cannot be exactly separated. Such abstract formations are crystals, ores, or metals where the moments of difference has developed. They have made themselves into neutral substances capable of forming concrete shapes. For it is precisely in such abstract forms that's okay. So he's going into mineralogy and the physical formation of the earth. And my comment about granitic and calcareous principle, I may or may not have stated rightly what that is. I just took a wild guess.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You know what I
So,
mean?
yeah, this is why, like I said, and I've forgotten some of it. I was reading the Hegel and terrestrial organism that actually does. and it's kind of long itself, but not as long as the actual Zuzaz. That kind of explains what he's going through here. He's
Okay.
going through the process of showing how the rock goes through different, forms. The chemical process has different shapes and everything. So it's kind of like the animal form in that it's changing form, but it's not really, you know, live. It's kind of going through like processes. Even the fossils that we find look like they may have been formed by life processes, as we know, even know today. He kind of at the time that's after the animal died, and of course, just sort of like sediment goes in and it hardens into shape, and it fills in the shape of the now gone creature. And so he's just basically the we have the basics of life, but they have lacking the determinative boundary that separates the organism from its environment. So every aspect of this is sort of like it's a large part indifferent. The Earth is indifferent to itself, but it has some of these proto life shapes. Yeah. The terrestrial organism constitutes a proto form of life, namely a crystalline, inanimate organism. It contains the necessary structural determination of life, but not the individuality needed to constitute a minimum of subjectivity that is necessary for life. That's mostly what he was going through here, showing all the different kind of again, yeah, lifelike changes the Earth goes through and how every aspect of it shapes, but it's not quite life yet. It's proto life.
Yeah, it's the setting for
Yeah.
life. And it's interesting because like if you read out of a textbook of, again, I hate this word, but bourgeois science, they try to they try to separate off what science considers bona fide life and not life. And the problem with it, and I think Hegel avoids this. Hegel looks at mineralogy as part of life. And I think he does that because he sees that mineralogy, the setting for actual life, is indispensable to life. Like life wouldn't be there if the earth hadn't formed exactly. And we know this intuitively. Like if the earth hadn't formed the way it had, there would be no life here. Okay. But
Also
but,
makes
but
an good.
yeah,
As it
you
makes the
go ahead, sorry.
informative pun that this is also the ground of life.
No, that's the most accurate statement right there.
Yeah.
Like like the ground of life is the earth. If the earth wasn't there, formed exactly as it was, uh, and he connects the two in a way that conventional science knows, but doesn't really try to connect it logically. They just sort of say, "Yeah, the background's there. It's fine." No, it's not fine. If we didn't have the elements of uh, what what did he say the elements are? The elements are the sun, the moon, and comets. Is that correctly? Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean,
Or is it Earth, the moon, and comets?
no, it
Like
was definitely. Let me see here. I also had it. I was actually just reading that.
yeah, because at that stage of thinking, right? Like when you're thinking about the cometary element that's part of the Earth's makeup, it's more of a meta placeholder, right? Like he's not speaking in like strict ideal metaphysics. It's more like he knows what he wants to talk about. He wants to talk about atmosphere. He wants to talk about the temperature of the air, how much nitrogen and oxygen is in the air. But instead of just putting those materialistic facts out there, some of which are kind of obscured at the time when he lives, he puts a meta placeholder there saying that this is what it is, right? And um
Yeah, sun, comet, moon.
yeah, sun, comet, moon.
So it's
Yeah.
like air as atmosphere, water as the sea, and
Yeah.
fire is both the terrestrial elements and
Hmm.
the fruit and the sun.
Yeah. This is one of the reasons why when you um this is one of the reasons why when I read Houlgate's essay on this book, I identify with the part that says even if Hegel got half of the science wrong and half the science right, you wouldn't have to rewrite Hegel's philosophy of nature in terms of the categorical system because he connected all of these logically as meta placeholders and estimated where all the science fit. And if the science didn't fit, then you just have to reorganize the materialist science's place in the book, not the categorical system, right? So that's not going anywhere unless you run into a logical problem, right? Which Hegel did. Like we know that he rewrote the logic several times and reorganized where stuff was. Like in the essence, if you read the encyclopedia versus the fully spelled out book, some of the categories are in different places because he rewrote them or just reorganized where they were. You know what I mean? But with this book, um, well, a total rewrite with today's science, I think would be awesome. Good luck getting someone to write it.
Some of the science is caught up with them anyway. So
Yeah.
I mentioned that in the message, like the Gaia hypothesis fits in well with what Hegel was saying.
More stuff I have to read up on. I'm also conscious that Gaian like there's a Gaian theory and a Gaian philosophy, and I think I remember um I think I remember reading in one of Harrison's book,
Yeah.
Prometheus and Gaia, that the Gaian theory was not a good one philosophically, but I couldn't reach for it right now if I tried.
I think the problem is it's because it's that's my one of my devices. Um, I'll fix that in a
It's,
second. Forgot
Yeah,
what
you're
some
happened.
fine.
people push it in a very mystical
Yeah,
direction.
yeah.
Yeah,
It became kind of a backwards pull because it kind of removed. Oh no, the humans are doing too bad. It's like, but we're part of the Earth,
Yeah.
and that's actually one of their arguments, right?
yeah,
That's the problem with Gaian theory.
yeah. They want to heal the earth by eliminating us, or
Versus,
basically
yeah.
saying we're not worth uh we're not worth saving, so get rid of us and the earth will heal itself. That's the I've actually seen like examples of that in popular culture. Um, everything from Fern Gully to Captain Planet. Like, if only these corporate thieves weren't robbing the earth, then everything would be fine. And it's like,
Well, I mean, they got part of it right in a way.
oh, oh yeah.
Hmm.
But again,
Taking
they
they still bought into the capitalist idea that capitalism is a natural part of humanity.
it's really weird because when you run across people who agree capitalism is the problem, but on the other hand, they also say uh, the what you just said. It's like this split personality thing. Um, I don't know. I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
That's all right.
Where
Um,
were we?
what
Okay.
was I thinking about too?
All right.
Yeah, I
Figure
think you can
these
probably
out.
skip most of this because he just kind of like describes at the time the huge man in transitions, a
Yeah,
la
this it
teacher
describes
Hegel.
the structure of the earth. Yeah. Hang
Yeah,
on just a second. I just need to check, make sure the kids are in and not going back out.
no worries, I can finish it.
Okay, go ahead. You kids in? You good? Did you close the garage? Great.
Mom's project. She said I could wear it. Yes, she did. It's a project. It kind of fits me perfectly.
Okay, so it's right about here, I think. We actually get a little more philosophical instead of just being empirical.
Done with it. Get back.
Well, it's- 'cause- 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 '
Sorry, guys. Just
Okay, I skipped to a part. It still kind of goes along, but it does transition towards the philosophical discussion.
yeah.
So, and this actually goes over a point I was talking about earlier. It's a lot clearer here where he's showing the boundary that doesn't quite meet animal or plant. Okay, so as regards to the rudimentary organic forms in geological organism, these belong principally to glaciers and limestone stratifications, partly as scattered animal and plant forms, but mainly in entire huge masses organically shaped through and through. They are also found in coal measures in which a tree form is very often distinctly recognizable, so that if the breccias are introduced into the reckoning, there's present as much organically shaped matter as pure mineral. It is easy enough to postulate here that the early existence of an organic world which was submerged by water, but then where did this world come from? It has arisen out of the earth, but not historically. It perpetually proceeds from the earth and has its substance in it. These organic forms, especially when they occur singularly, do not constitute the entire rock mass, are present where beds pass over to one another. The boundary where the moments which processes nature lets fall apart are posited in a unity and is preemptively the site of organic forms, of petrifications, and other those products which are neither animal nor plant forms, which transcend the crystalline forms and playful essays in organic formations. Is especially blah in which this encounters formations that they themselves, but it's partially transforming earthly matter. Yeah, you can see it's slowly transitioning. It is. I'm trying to not overload it too much. For the former, partially transforming its earthy nature to the sulfurous principle, but partially retaining its in itself metality, sublates its fixed subjectivity. In punctiform nature, opened up by bitumen and containing differentiation generally, receives a metality in the continuity of an absolute subject and predicate, is infinite, and fluctuates between organic and inorganic. So like it wasn't the animal form became, or it wasn't life, became life, and now it became non-life again. I think is what he means there. Similarly, the calcareous formation as a neutral substance has in its sides moment of reality, they persist, and simple metality. Though the simplicity of its continuity manifests itself as a qualitative unity which cancels the indifference of the sides, a unity which contains the side of the neutral substance, and a neutral substance which has unity. The calcareous formation thus represents a transition to organic being. On the one side, arresting the leap into dead neutrality, and on the other side, into lifeless and unitary abstraction. These organic forms, not all of course, but these others are not in question, are not to be thought of as having once actually lived and then died. On the contrary, they are stillborn. I guess it depends how they form, but yeah, there's a lot of that. To suppose otherwise is like supposing that bone fibers were once veins or nerves and subsequently hardened. It is organoplastic nature which generates the organic in the element of immediate being and therefore has as a dead shape. Crystallized through and through, like the artist who represents human and other forms in stone or on a flat canvas. He does not kill people, dry them out, and pour stony material into them, or press them into stone. You can do this too, for he pours models into modes. What he does is to produce, in accordance with his idea and by means of tools, forms which represent life, but are not themselves living. Nature, however, does this directly, without needing such mediation. That is, the notion is not present as something conceived or imagined, while the thing stands over against the thinker and is fashioned by him. The notion has not the form of consciousness, but is immediately in the element of being, not detached from it. The notion has the material for its work, where the moments of the organic are present in their totality. The question is not of a universal life of nature being everywhere alive, but of the essence of life. This essence is to be comprehended, to be exhibited in the moments of its actuality or totality, and these moments are to be demonstrated.
This is fascinating. There's so this is one of those things I've always wondered about, but if you look at life, what is supposed to be life is as we know it, dogs, us, roaches, all that stuff. We're ongoing chemical processes, and chemical processes exist in the earth in its so-called inorganic form, but they're still chemical processes nonetheless. And it's interesting to me how with Hegel, and maybe this is kind of restating what I said earlier, but how because he deals with inorganic and organic life in this way, they're so linked up with if you break it down, mechanical and chemical processes, which are exactly the same. But I'm starting to get a feel for why he looks at nature as more of an external process, and then he looks at like organic life as an internally self-regulating process. So like the outer world, right? You have the earth and you have the cometary element, which helps shape the earth, from the outside with the atmosphere and cause chemical processes to start. And then there are internal living beings that live and die themselves and have an internal process of life, right? Okay. Yeah, that's interesting because somewhere at the beginning of this book, like he talks about nature as being having the notion in it, but being unconscious of it or outside the notion. Hang on a second. So that's all right. So that's 294. Hang on. There's got to be a
Hmm.
hang on.
Here you just talked about the part of history because chemical processes can be reversed. You can't necessarily tell direct necessary temporal direction just based on what you find on the earth in geology. That's right. Because stuff can get mixed around and such. So the history you see may not you have to figure. Yeah. It's at the surface. The original kind of just stratification line is not necessarily exactly historical. This on its face, it can't be. Let's see here.
Let's see here. In man's practical approach to I know I'm backtracking here, but I think it connects with
Yeah.
what we're starting to talk about at this point in the book. In man's practical approach to nature, the latter is for him something immediate and external, and he himself is an external and therefore sensuous individual. Although a relation to natural objects, he correctly regards himself as an end. A consideration of nature according to this relationship yields the standpoint of finite teleology. In this, we find the correct presupposition that nature does not itself contain the absolute final end. But if this way of considering the matter starts from particular finite ends on the one hand, it makes them into presuppositions whose contingent content may in itself be insignificant and trivial. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. Yeah. Practical approach, self-seeking. And you know how Doug has been going on about pragmatists. So I think this speaks to that somewhat. The Zuzat says the practical approach to nature is in general determined by appetite, which is self-seeking. Need impels us to use nature for our own advantage, to wear her out, to wear her down, in short, to annihilate her. And here, the practical approach is concerned only with individual products of nature or with individual aspects of those products.
Beta, the other practical approach. That's our end is paramount.
Yeah,
Yeah,
RN was paramount.
it's the stereotypical teleology that how everything's just perfect for this or that for us.
Yeah. So, all of this is to say that, if you're a pragmatist, you're pretty much almost exclusively whatever you're talking about centric. Like you're trying to solve a practical problem and tailor your philosophy to it, um, which unfortunately leads you to uh, missing the whole of what you're talking about. Oh, you cherry pick what you need and you leave the rest. Um, but there was a hang on just a second. I've got requests. Keep talking. Keep talking.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to think about here too.
Sarah.
Come here, honey.
Okay. It considers universal on its own and twist the notion.
And actually, we don't have to stick to this part. What was it? 294. I was trying to make a point with a piece of language Hegel uses, but I'm not even sure if I can find it very easily in this book.
I mean, it is, I think, OCR, so you might build an actual search. But
It's it's not that. It's
okay.
hang on. So all right, so there's the idea. So you have the idea, you have life, cognition, then the absolute idea. This is from the logic, and he says, God, I'm looking at this like it's the freaking Bible. Um, I'm, a logical idea.
Vitamin.
Not right now, honey. I'm busy. Go play. Okay. Considered according to this unity that it has with itself the idea that is for itself is intuiting, and the intuiting idea is nature. But as intuiting, the idea is posited in the one-sided determination of immediacy or negation through external reflection. The absolute freedom of the idea, however, is that it does not merely pass over into life, nor that it lets life shine within itself as finite cognition. And when he says that, he's talking about the two first sections of the logic, but that in the absolute truth of itself, it resolves to release out of itself into freedom the moment of its particularity or of the initial determining and otherness, the immediate idea as its reflection, or itself as nature. That's interesting because he writes it out differently than he does in the science of logic. You know what I mean? Like it almost reads like a religious text coming out of the science of nature, but you open up the encyclopedia, and it almost seems more concise, a statement coming out here. The absolute freedom of the idea resolves to release out of itself into freedom the moment of its particularity, the immediate idea as its reflection. The yeah, I'm I'm not gonna solve that problem today. Sorry, guys.
That's fine.
Like every time I read this, every time I read the logic, I like start tripping over myself because like I understand more, but there are parts of it that I still don't understand. You know what I mean? And I have to dig back in, and sitting on a YouTube channel 10 minutes until we're done is not the place
Yeah.
to figure it out.
Fine.
Um,
Also, I was thinking unrelatedly earlier, talking about how, even Hegel got half of the science stuff right, the order would still be fine. Just realizing that, yeah, even nuclear physics would have fit under the category of chemistry because it's all about, uh, what's the term again? The drive of differentiated matters to unite and transform, which is the underlying nature of what chemistry is, anyways. So,
you know what? If you think about it, if you look at if you look at nuclear physics, is what you said.
Mhm.
So if you look at nuclear physics, it's harder to quantify something like that given our bourgeois, again, I hate this word, approach to science because it almost looks like magic. Because you have this substance that is literally mineralogical in nature, but it's doing stuff that regular rocks don't do. It's
well,
it's emanating.
you're talking about radioactive decay, right?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
but but well, exactly. Radioactive elements, when you get down to it, are just uh, el- you know, they're on the um, chemical. They're on the table of elements. Okay. So if you come across a piece of iron, that is on the periodic table. So is uranium, but they don't act the same. Iron is inert, but we know iron's formation is not an inert process. Iron is formed within the sun, right? Or stars, I should say, and they explode and then they end up in our solar system and then they become part of planetary bodies and so on and so forth, right? But with radioactive elements, we see the how did Hegel just put it in here? The
All right.
organic to inorganic process in real time because these things are moving fast. The particles coming out of them are, you know, they're organic life destroying in a way that iron can't do, for example. And so to be able to describe them, you need a system like Hegel's that recognizes how the non-organic earth is still a changing one. You know what I mean? Like it's easy. Yeah. I would argue it's easier to understand uh, um, uh, nuclear. Well, it's easier to understand radioactive elements with Hegel than without him.
And I'm sure Jim's going to point out the nuclear physics Russian book, Russian, the one that brings in dialectics.
I actually have Soviet era physics textbooks.
So,
Nice.
So I have like one on quantum physics, and the author talks a lot about dialectics.
Nice.
oh boy.
Yeah. I'm right there with you. Okay, so life of the earth. This crystal of life, the inanimate organism of the earth, which has its notion in the sidereal connection outside of it, but possesses its own peculiar process as a presupposed past, is the immediate subject of the meteorological process through which this subject, as in itself the totality of life, no longer becomes merely an individual shape, but is fructified into vitality. So basically, you add comet to the earth and vitality. Land and especially sea, as thus the real possibility of life, perpetually erupt at every point into punctiform transient forms of life. Lichens, infusoria, and in the sea, countless hosts of phosphorescent points of life. But it is just because Generatio equivoca has this objective organism outside it, that it is restricted to this punctiform organization, does not develop internally into a specific articulated organism or reproduce itself exo. So basically, what he's saying is basically what I was trying to say earlier in this broadcast, but did so inelegantly in comparison to Hegel. So Hegel is saying the Earth is a living organism, but it is only a living organism because it is subjected to the cometary element that that deposits life on it. The Earth is not an internally self-regulating organism. In other words, like if you watch Transformers, right, and you watch the movie, oh, the Earth is not like Unicron, right? It's not going to transform into a man who's going to come attack people, right? It's literally living only because certain conditions have bestowed vitality onto it. And that bestowance isn't going away as long as the atmosphere is still here. And so like he says in the last part, because it is just because I really wish I knew more languages. What does that say? Generatio equivoca. It's Latin.
Yeah.
4 years of high school Latin. I don't know what the fuck this says. But it is just because GA has this objective organism outside it that it is restricted to this punctiform organization. Now, in other words, if the Earth were internally living, it wouldn't be punctiform. It would be all-encompassing. It would have organs that self-regulate what the Earth is, so on and so forth. And he probably says this right here, Zusatz. Whereas the geological organism of the Earth was at first a product in the formative process of its shape, now as the underlying productive individuality, it overcomes its rigidity and unfolds into subjective vitality, which, however, it excludes from itself and delivers over to other individuals. Because of the cometary element, it is able to give the fruit of life to all the life forms on it, but is not itself living, is what it internally. Yeah, I'm just repeating these words. Sorry, I know what they mean. Because is only implicitly vitality. The truly living organism is an other than the geological organism itself. Exactly. That's brilliant.
Yeah, because it's not the vitality of life itself, it's what provides the vitality.
Yeah. Land of milk and honey. But the milk and honey is not living. Unless you're reading horror novels, and then all bets are off. But since this is in itself the negativity of itself, is the sublating of its immediacy. It posits the inwardness of itself, but as a being which is the other of it. That is, the earth is fertile. Fertile simply as the grounded basis, exactly what we were talking about, Boden, of the individual vitality upon it. But the earth is vitality only in an indeterminate mode. True, this vitality erupts at all points, but only feebly. This universal life of the earth has living parts, which are the elements, i.e., are its universal, its inorganic nature. But as the earth is also a particular body over against its satellite and the sun and comets, it is the perpetual generation, i.e., the conservation of the system of differences is the absolutely universal chemical process Since, however, the giant members of this diremption are free, independent individuals, their connection exists purely as the free process of motion, while the comets themselves are a fresh, perpetual generation of this process. The reality of this process, then, the destruction of seemingly independent forms and the consequent emergence of a real individual unity, this is first reached in the individual chemical process, which for this very reason is profounder and more fundamental than the universal process. But because the universal process of the elements is that of material substances, the individual processes cannot be without it. Cannot be, right? Without it. Got to have the background to have those. The free independent members of the universal process, sun, comet, and moon, are now in their truth the elements. He's breaking it down. Yes. Okay, let's repeat this because this is key, I think. The free independent members of the universal process, meaning the sun, the comets, and the moon, as meta placeholders, are now in their truth the elements. Air is atmosphere, water is the sea, but fire is terrestrial element contained in the fructified dissolved earth and separated off as a fructifying sun. The life of the earth is the process of atmosphere and sea in which it generates these elements, each of which is an independent life for itself, while all of them constitute only this process. Here, the chemical process has lost its absolute meaning and is present only as moment. It is reflected into self-subsistence, subdued by the subject in which it is held fast and powerless. Each element, through its substance, is itself related as a free subject to the other, and the formation of the organic earth contains the modes of existence of its organic life. So basically, everything that we know up to now is being subbladed into actual organic life as an internal process. Right? So if we look at water as a moment, we only have to think of our individual composition to know that water is part of our internal self-regulating process, you know?
It's
In goes water, out goes water.
the bulk of our mass is water.
Yeah, exactly. And so if we think of it that way, we realize, we realize how connected we are to the more universal, the independent members of the universal process, as he puts it. We have cometary elements in us, moon and sun. And if you recall, Carl Sagan was actually famous for pointing out, pointing a lot of this out in his own work, you know, saying that, you know, we are literally star stuff. We wouldn't be here if stars weren't exploding across the galaxy, reorganizing the matter so that we would end up a part of what eventually formed. This is fascinating. Like anyone who comes along and tells you that Hegel is antiquated, you know, this is the proof against it. Like, God, I just wish it were more popularized, right? Because the only people talking about any of this stuff are like buried in some Princeton journal, you know, or on a YouTube channel where maybe one person, maybe two, takes a look at us, you know?
Yeah, God, makes me keep thinking today the kind of thing where people take, and well, of course, there was a standard line in Russia for a long time that, you know, Hegel was purely idealist, and what Marx did is a proper materialist, revamp of all of Hegel. And it's like when I think we both agree at this point when Hegel said he turned Hegel on his head. To me, that felt like that was specifically on Hegel's historical idealism. and not the entire philosophy.
Well, I can't
Right.
remember the exact quote because I thought it was that Hegel was on his head, he had to be turned onto his feet. Like what he means by
Oh,
that
yeah.
is that in order to turn philosophy on its feet, it had to first be organized correctly on the head. Like
Mhm.
he yeah, I know I've said this before, but it bears repeating every single time Hegel is considered that at the time Hegel was writing, Hegel's number one complaint was that scientific textbook in Germany along the lines of logic and science were all hopelessly mired in um, mechanical thinking. Everything was deemed uh, everything was deemed um,
Mhm.
so like
Okay.
I I need to reread it because I'm going to get this wrong. But Hegel's number one complaint um,
It sounds about right. But yeah.
about the state of science in Germany was that there was no ideal language suitable for talking about the mechanical sciences, and so everything was sort of thrown into the vulgar materialist pile when it came to science. You know, there wasn't anything connecting all of it together in one unity, I guess you could say. And he said, that's not going to work, right? Because if you look at all the science textbooks, it's just so many facts arbitrarily collected together, and the author would take a guess
Hmm.
as to how to organize it all, right? And we see this all the way up to today in American textbooks is that um, they try to enumerate the whole without looking at the particulars and how they're all connected, and they end up in this sort of like snake eating its own tail situation where you never get all the facts out that lead to half the theories that there are. You know what I mean? Like the reason that we can call Marxist scientific theories about capital, like for instance, of the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, like that's a bona fide Marxist theory. But that Marxist theory is based on being able to logically connect the most abstract element in the system, the commodity, to all the processes in which the commodity participates. It's the same way here. You can't talk about the life of the earth in the Hegelian sense. Hegel cannot talk about the life of the earth in the way he does without having already assembled all of these particulars logically. Like it just wouldn't make sense, right? And he's able to break it down in ways that previously science at his time were having to guess at, you know. Um, there's what do I want to say?
You know, so
I know
there are
I
several
I I know
issues
I know
just
I'm kind of
purely.
going long on this. Yeah, go ahead, Jim. Sorry.
I think what so Soviet Union in the early years faced a lot of similar issues too, and there was lots of debates over how to reconstruct certain disciplines like psychology. There's on one hand, there was known as Gestalt psychology, which looked dialectical, but was idealist. Then there was American behaviorism as formulated by John B. Watson, which was, okay, that was materialist, but it was also very mechanistic. That was not really, it was not dialectical at all. And there was all years of debates about how can we synthesize these two approaches, create
Yeah, yeah,
a science that
exactly.
would be dialectical and materialist at once.
Well, if you think about the two sides, right, you need to have the idealist side squared away before you can start making materialist theories. Marx wouldn't be able to come up with, for again, the theory of the tendency of the rate of profit to fall if he didn't reorganize the ideal side of how everything is connected. You have to you have to connect the commodity to the process in which it participates, and then you can start to make materialist theories about what's going to show up in reality, right? But if your system of ideas, right? I was going to say ideal system, but that's a bad way to put it. If your ideal side is organized properly, you're never going to be able to make those hypotheses. Um, there's a quote from Marx in the early pages of Capital in which he says that talking about political economy is not like chemistry. You can't go into the lab and start experimenting with the different elements to see what happens. You have to do this with the mind. And the only way you can do it with the mind is if your ideas are clear and logically organized to where everything is connected together and you can talk about all of the particulars to where they add up to a whole that, on the other hand, is not a whole without the particulars, right? And so when people try to say something is too idealistic or too materialistic, what they're really trying, what's really going on, and I know I'm just repeating myself here, but this is also for the audience. What's really going on is that if you run across people, and I have, who say that philosophy is secondary, what they're really wanting to do is go in and deal with something as it happens and try to make educated guesses. The problem is that if they try to bypass philosophy or call it a balance sheet after the action is over, they're really going in blind. Like they have no idea how to organize their thoughts, or they take a rough hack, right? And depending on their system of ideas, they're
Well, it's even worse than that because those people actually do have certain philosophical ideas, but they don't realize it. So they
yes,
don't.
exactly.
They don't take a critical approach to those ideas because they don't know. They don't realize that they have them. But they
This
do.
is why there are so many people who show up who, if you really take a look at them, are more Nietzschean or Aristotelian or whatever else, and it's like a patchwork. You know, they're they're not conscious of how their ideas contribute to their practice, and so it breaks down, right? And the worst part is in the postmortem, when you try to figure out what went wrong, the last thing they want to talk about is how their ideas have contributed to the failure. But that's exactly the conclusion that you need to draw. You need to figure out where your ideas went wrong so that the next time you go and practice, you're better organized. Another way to think about this is, imagine if Marx was like, philosophy is just secondary. I can go in, I can read all these people, and I can try to take rough hacks at what political economy is to me, right? But fortunately for us, Marx was philosophically educated. And so he was aware that if you're not able to match your I if you're not able to approach reality with an organized set of ideas that represent that reality, you're taking a guess, you know? And this I think is the background of Marx and Engels' whole lives is that they wrote all of these tracts saying how wrongly the poverty of philosophy, for instance, they went after the Frenchman, who I always forget his name.
Proudhon.
Yeah, Proudhon. They went after Proudhon because Proudhon had certain solutions for capitalist society that, you know, if you looked at it properly, didn't make sense. Like they would look like they were good ideas, but if actually put into practice, would lead to this happening and this happening and this happening. And Marx and Engels went in there and said, "We're going to write this down for you, so you realize that Proudhon is a disorganized piece of shit." you know, um,
I need to read that
uh,
book.
hmm?
I still need to read Poverty of Philosophy.
Yeah.
I think we did that was either Harrison or what was it? Did it a few years ago.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I know Doug was there, or I don't know. It's been a while. Um, like we tried our hand at German ideology. German ideology is very difficult to read unless you know what you're looking at. Um, People like to quote from it, but if you actually like go through, it's on particular subjects, on particular people that they're criticizing and saying, look, your system of ideas is muddled, or you're misusing people who have systems of ideas, and half of them relied on Hegel. They said, yes, we realize that you're relying on Hegel, but you're doing so mechanically. You know, Hegel's grammar is meant to be applied, not to be just sort of cut and paste into your treatise. That was the big thing with anti-Düring, that Engels wrote for the most part. Marx wrote the economic chapter, but that was the big thing Düring was doing, was cutting and pasting sections of Hegel in and substituting out categories in a way that frankly had Marx and Engels rolling on the floor like, this is hilarious. Like this is just sad. And then he tried to call it the new socialism, which is a whole nother podcast. Go ahead, Jim.
You call it the new synthesis, like Bob Avakian.
Yes, exactly. The new synthesis. Only for him it was the old new synthesis, I guess you could say. Man. All right, guys, it's 9:15 and we're I think we're at a place where we're kind of seeing all of this
Yeah.
come together very nicely with the life of the earth, sort of the transition from inorganic background to life generating uh, um, seed bed for organic life.
I mean, I may not really have like the full understanding of the classics like Hegel did, but I'm kind of seeing his interest of basically him using clay as a, and, lines on as a starting point toward life.
Hmm. Yeah, it's it's weird for me to say this, but even after a life of studying scientific, you know, of studying science casually, since elementary school, it's only now that I can actually like see the connection between the broader inorganic universe and organic life itself. You know, so many representations out there try to make it sounds like magic. You know what I mean? Like if you guys watch Star Trek Discovery, they reach for the mushrooms and say the mushrooms are this, you know, this background that generates life. But again, that sci-fi element kind of undermines what do I want to call it, mundane actual basis of how all of this stuff is connected in reality.
Well, Star Trek, they always got evolution wrong. So anyway,
Well, it is sci-fi, so they're taking a rough
Star
hack,
Trek,
hack
okay,
rough,
that
rough,
was
rough
one
hack at it.
area of science they got wrong. Pretty consistently.
Yeah. All right, folks. Let's see what I want to do. And I know hang on. Why don't we read through from the Zuzats on 294 through to, I know we probably backed up a little bit. But hang on. God damn it, I have a cold. How long is this? Jesus Christ. The
And how
plant.
much? Yeah.
I'm just trying to see how long this section is because I don't know. So from 294 to 322 takes us all the way through plant plant formation or however that is. What if we take the next 2 weeks or maybe 1 week depending and read all the way to the process of transformation here on 322, because I feel like now that we're sort of we have the framework of how um the the universal is transitioning into the particular, that we sort of have the framework for how to read those next 20 pages. And that I mean that 20 pages is full of all of the particulars. So philosophically, all we're really reading are the details, and we don't need to remember them all. But as long as we read them through and are able to say, okay, here's where this part is in the framework, right?
Yep. Sorry, I was
Then
just trying to understand something here because I'm a little confused. I might figure it out. We'll have to figure it out later. Why does this say? I'll find the paragraph here in just a second because this is a long. There it is. 346A. But I would never find the B. So it makes sense to me that they probably had to split it up. But I don't see the split spot.
hang on a second. Let me see if I can find it up here. Because
I don't think it's that granular.
well, this is going back to what I said earlier. If we take a look at the table of contents, we might get a hang on. We might get a
Is it just says 346, 347?
yeah, okay.
It's somewhere in the
Formation,
multi-pages.
assimilation, and reproduction. You know, looking at this, it's fascinating because, like, if you look at the plant nature and he shows formation, he shows assimilation, and then reproduction. Marx follows a similar taxonomy where capital is concerned, because if you think of how capitalist exchange formations are formally and they have there's a
I got it.
formal subsumption, and I know you guys have heard this before.
There
Formal
is.
subsumption versus total subsumption. Basically, under formal subsumption, you have
Been such a while.
like a more traditional feudal set of agriculture that's sort of hitched like a trailer to your car, so that you can inject capital into the agricultural formation and get capital out. but the formation of the economy is still feudal, right? It's like the American South. The American South, runs on slave labor, but capital is injected into it. So it's formally subsumed into the capitalist system versus what happened later. Slavery was abolished and the agricultural formations in the South were assimilated to a capitalist, purely capitalist basis, right? And here, with the way I had a point there, like going from formation to assimilation to total, I don't want to say subsumption, but total, you know, organically.
We raised the issue of how capitalism exists side by side with earlier modes of production. Then over time, it absorbs them and
Yeah,
reconstructs them
yeah,
into
and I, I'm realizing saying that out loud that it is not a parallel exactly because the process of capitalist formation historically is not the same thing as the logical formation of plants in Hegel's philosophy of nature. In fact, it's the reverse of it. He's logically showing you how all the Hegel is showing you how. So how do I put this? The end product of plant formation in the philosophy of nature, as reflected in this book, okay, is the end product of plant formation is uh, the plant itself, which is capable of reproduction, assimilation, and formation. The order that he takes them in is the logical is the logical one. When we're talking about capitalist formation, we're talking about a historical process in which earlier forms are absorbed into the newly formed capitalist regime and made a part of it. So when you're talking about capitalism, it's almost like a mirror image of what he shows here with the plant nature. I'm beginning to understand how Marx's materialist idealism, dialectical materialism, however you want to put it, is the mirror image of Hegel's absolute idealism. Yeah. Do you guys see it?
Say it again.
Okay. So here in Hegel, we're looking at the plant. The plant already exists historically today. It is an immediate subject. You can go outside, you can mow your grass, you can pick flowers and give it to your sweetheart, whatever, right? It is shit. It's already existing. And Hegel is trying to enumerate what the plant is from its most abstract element of formation all the way up until the actual material plant, right? And Marx organizes capital in roughly the same way and starting with the commodity, the most abstract. But when he considers the process, logically speaking, of capitalist subsumption, he has to talk about it historically. And talking about it historically is not in the logical, it's the mirror image of the logical formation shown here. When you get to it, capitalist subsumption has the commodity and everything that it does subsumed into it. And then you watch the process carry out, you know, the someone comes along historically and they inject capital into an agricultural concern that 10 years ago was a purely feudal set of relations. that allows for the crops to get, sown, right? Um, I can see it in my head, but it's the the way to talk about this. I'm gonna have to write this out because people always talk about the like. Sorry.
Fine.
Wait. So you have the plant here, or you have the earth, right? Um, when he's talking about the life of the earth in the section before plants, he's enumerating what the earth looks like as an immediate, you know, daily process. And we know that those daily processes are made up of particulars that were assimilated to the earth by its formation, right? Marx, when he's talking historically about capital, has to take it from the historical perspective as opposed to the logical one. And that means that he knows that the process of capitalist subsumption as an ongoing historical process takes its segue from the immediate in the life of reality, in the material world, right? And its unfolding, which Hegel takes as the backdrop, is more immediate from Marx, right? Like how do you talk about historical? How do you talk about? Yeah, I'm gonna have to think about this some more because the way Marx describes the subsumption of local economies to capitalism from a period in which they weren't before. Hegel looks at that timeline of history as a given, whereas Marx is like, if you want to talk about the historical process not as a given, and be able to explain it, you have to be able to do so with the right ideas, which is why he starts Capital the way he does. He enumerates what capitalism is composed of logically throughout the 3 volumes, but parallel to that, he describes the historical sequences, processes in general, right? That that proceed from those. I don't want to say condition. It's like I say, uh, it's almost cliche in the literature to talk about how Hegel and Marx are mirror images of each other because one takes the ideal side and the other takes the material, right? But it's another thing to be able to like hold them in the mirror to each other. And that's what I'm trying to do here. I was just trying to compare the plant nature to the process of capitalist subsumption and say, Hegel runs it this way, Marx runs it backwards. But then my brain tries to match them 1-to-1 and it doesn't exactly work out. Because you know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm just, oh.
Yeah, it's breaking my brain to think about this. And the more I think about it, the less I know about it. I need to sit down and write this out. That's all there is to it, so that I can see it on paper and be like, does this make sense? Like I just need to go back and read Capital Volume 1. That might actually help. And I know who has time, but I'll do it anyway. All right, guys, it's 30 minutes past the hour already. So, like I said, let's try and read let's try to read to uh what did I say, Jim?
It's already in the chat.
294,
great.
294, 322.
Yeah. So 25 odd pages, and read not to remember everything, but read with the structure that he's already kind of given us in mind, and the fact that all we're really doing is filling in the details of what's involved in that in that so like we have the earth, and the earth has the conditions in the atmosphere laid out for life to uh life to um life to appear, and then life is going to appear. So there we go. Yes, pajamas, honey. You guys have a great night. I'll be talking to you soon.